Hello, and welcome to Scream Scene, the horror movie podcast where we watch every horror movie ever made in chronological order, and then we rank them from best to worst. My name's Ben.
And I'm Sarah.
Thank you so much for listening to us today. How are you doing, Sarah?
I am doing all right. We are in the thick of winter, but I can tell that a Chinook is coming this coming week because I got a migraine.
Well, hopefully we can make it through the recording of tonight's episode without you dying.
Hopefully.
Okay, let's see how we can do.
I mean, also, hopefully I don't die during the movie.
Yes.
Because if what I'm gathering from the title, if I die, my blood will be taken and then I'll become a zombie?
Heart, actually.
Well, before you tell me more about my heart making me a zombie, I want to give a shout out to a new patron of the night. Thank you, Katsikin, for joining our Patreon.
Thank you so much.
If you want to be like Katsikin, you can go to patreon.com/screamscenepodcast and become a patron of the night for as little as $1 a month. So, Ben, heart and zombies?
Yes. Today, Sarah, we are watching DOCTOR BLOOD'S COFFIN from 1961, which is the first color zombie movie in the UK.
Okay. With a title like that, I think more vampires. So I'm very curious. What do you have to tell me?
We're definitely doing some mad scientist stuff here, is more what's going on.
Okay.
Some sort of Frankensteinian zombies here, as opposed to, like, voodoo zombies. The story of Dr. Blood's Coffin begins with its writer, Nathan Juran. Born Neftali Hertz Juran to a Jewish family in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1907, Juran's family emigrated to America in 1912, and Juran earned a master's degree in architecture from MIT.
Oh, wow. I thought MIT only did technology, not architecture. I guess buildings are a type of technology.
Yeah, like architecture is a technology.
Okay, cool.
With the construction industry suffering during the Great Depression, Juran moved to LA and found work building and designing sets, becoming an art director and winning an Oscar for his work on How Green Was My Valley in 1941. During the Second World War, he worked as an intelligence officer, and after the war, he got a contract at Universal as an art director, working on films such as The Strange Door, which we covered in episode 158.
Okay.
When director Joseph Pevney walked out on completing The Black Castle, Juran stepped in and finished the rest of the movie, and we covered that picture in episode 159.
So he's been a bit of a ghost throughout the whole show, just kind of hovering in the wings.
From there, he signed a directing contract with Universal, making westerns, swashbucklers, and sci-fi films. In 1957, he directed 20 Million Miles to Earth, which has special effects by Ray Harryhausen, and he followed that up by directing the classic Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which also, of course, has Harryhausen effects. And this was followed with the cult classics The Brain from Planet Arouse and Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. Okay.
Is that first one meaning arouse and like arousal?
It is spelt Arous.
Yeah.
Yes. It's like a sci-fi thingy.
Yeah, no, I can tell. We watch it for the articles.
Mm-hmm. After this movie, he's going to direct Jack the Giant Killer in 1962, but he just wrote this script. He doesn't direct this film.
Okay.
And Juran wrote the script under the pen name Jerry Juran. No one will ever know.
No one will ever know. I'm also like, I keep mishearing it as Duran.
So with this script, Juran sold it to director Sidney J Furie. The original script was set in a California gold mining town, but Furie worked in the UK and brought in writers James Kelly and Peter Miller to transpose the story to a tin mine in Cornwall. So Sidney Joseph Furie was born in Toronto, Canada in 1933.
A Canadian?
Yes.
Hey.
He was born to a Jewish family, and he worked as a writer for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
CBC.
In 1957, Furie shot a TV movie for CBC called A Dangerous Age about two teens who wish to marry against their parents' wishes, and so they skip over the border to the US to elope and find themselves fugitives from the law. This TV movie was shot in 12 days, but people were sufficiently impressed enough that it was decided to shop the movie around to play as like a second feature, which is how it ended up getting a theatrical release in the US and the UK. In Canada, A Dangerous Age was largely ignored, but it got rave reviews in the UK, where Furie was hailed as a fresh new talent. His second film, a teen crime drama called A Cool Sound from Hell, got a similar response. Nobody in Canada knew that it ever came out, but they loved it in the UK. So Furie decided to move to England to pursue the rest of his career.
That's a very classic Canadian filmmaker experience of like no one in Canada even knows you did something, but likely over in Europe they do.
Yeah. Upon arrival, he directed 2 horror pictures, this one and its own second feature, Snake Woman. So we are seeing Sidney J Furie's like third movie.
Okay.
Furie would continue to work in the UK, with his first big hit coming with 1963's The Ipcris Files, starring Michael Caine, a classic 60s spy movie.
When would Michael Caine be in his career there? Like, is that post-Alfie?
That's, I think, pre-Alfie.
Okay.
That's very early in his career.
Cool.
Later hits from Furie included the sequel to The Ipcris File, The Naked Runner, as well as the Billie Holiday biopic Lady Sings the Blues, the 1980 remake of The Jazz Singer, the 1981 horror film The Entity, 80s war movie Iron Eagle and its 2 sequels, and the final Christopher Reeve Superman movie, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace.
Okay, so goes on to become kind of a big deal. But right now it's his third movie.
Yes. And today he is 91 years old.
Oh, he's still alive?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. It's not always that happens.
Furie got a deal with United Artists to distribute Dr. Blood's Coffin in the UK and the US, and the picture was shot in 10 days on a budget of £25,000. The picture stars Irish actor Kieron Moore, who was 36 at the time this was shot. He'd begun acting professionally on stage when he was 19 and initially entered the British film industry as Kieran O'Hanrahan, which is like the anglicization of his Irish name.
Yeah.
This got changed to Kieron Moore when he was signed by Alexander Korda and played against Vivian Leigh in the 1948 adaptation of Anna Karenina.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Unfortunately, that film was a critical and commercial flop, and Moore became relegated to B pictures for the rest of his career. He quit acting in 1974 to become an activist in the Third World and passed away in 2007. His co-star here is Hazel Court, who we will remember as Elizabeth from the 1957 Curse of Frankenstein, as well as the love interest in 1959's The Man Who Could Cheat Death. The movie also features Ian Hunter, who played Lanyon in the 1941 version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Okay.
Dr. Blood's Coffin, despite its low budget, was shot in color, showing again how Eastman color now meant that black and white was no longer necessarily the mark of a low budget. The picture was released in January of 1961 in the UK and was rated X by the BBFC. United Artists was reportedly quite pleased with the finished product, though critics warned that the film had plenty of memorably gory visuals at the expense of an interesting or novel story.
I mean, that sounds good. Like, you set this up of like, it's a mad scientist. It's something to do with the heart instead of actual like voodoo creation of zombies. And I'm over here sitting here going like, this sounds really old hat.
Mm-hmm.
But gory and in color. So they're trying to do something new. They're trying to push boundaries based off of an old formula, it sounds like.
Yeah, the impression I got, because the critics all kind of said like the story is very old hat, nothing they hadn't seen before. So it sounds like they're trying to sort of gussy up like an old, weak premise, basically.
So we'll see if it's actually just lipstick on a pig.
Right, exactly. Zombie movie experts note that this movie represents a significant milestone in the presence of the screen zombie, who here appears visibly decomposed and notably violent.
Okay, I mean, in the dead one, he's noticeably decomposed.
For sure.
But still under the control of someone else, so...
Yeah,
okay, interesting.
And, before that, a lot of zombies have been more like servants rather than like physical threats in a lot of cases, right?
Yeah.
And certainly with the time frame of these two movies, they were being developed like in parallel rather than one influencing the other, because they came out about the same time.
Yeah.
So Dr. Blood's Coffin is available on DVD from MGM, Blu-ray from Scream Factory, and is streaming on Tubi.
Tubi comes to our aid yet again. Well, folks, hopefully you can find either a physical copy or watch it on Tubi along with us. You're going to hear a brief musical interlude, and when we come back, we will discuss Dr. Blood's Coffin from 1961, directed by Sidney Furie.
See you on the other side, everybody.
Welcome back to Scream Scene. We just finished watching Dr. Blood's Coffin from 1961, directed by Sidney J Furie. Ben, first thoughts?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's not, I would not characterize this as a zombie movie, personally.
I think maybe I admire this movie more than I like this movie.
Yeah, I can see that. I would say that it's a pretty good movie, and I think it has a lot of ambitions. Yeah, I think it does. It's more akin to Frankenstein than to The Dead One.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, why don't I give the synopsis?
Go for it.
So while our film is set in Cornwall, we begin in Vienna when we see a masked doctor, masked because he's wearing it like a regular surgical mask, a masked doctor thrown out of the hospital for running some experiments on people. Then we cut to, in Cornwall, a small town, and we see that there are people who are going missing, as well as some equipment from the local doctor's office. We get to see one of these kidnappings happen. Basically, someone who the camera's very careful to not show us his identity. He sneaks into someone's room, chloroforms them, and then injects them with this mysterious substance. As he's doing this, when we see the kidnapping, he drops the needle, basically, and so that's left behind as evidence. But then he picks up the guy, we later learn his name is George Beale, and takes him to these caves in the old tin mine and to a secret underground lab. As the local doctor, the sergeant, and the doctor's nurse, whose name is Linda, investigate, the doctor's son, Peter, arrives home for some rest after studying in Vienna. Peter helps lead the search in the tin mine.
Wait a minute, Sarah. What's Peter's name?
His name is Peter Blood.
And so he's a doctor.
Yeah, he's a Dr. Blood.
Right. And so's his dad, I guess.
Yeah, his dad is Dr. Blood.
Mm-hmm. Weird. You know, the very common last name in Cornwall of Blood. They must have been descended from that great pirate, Captain Blood.
Was that a real person?
No, it's an Errol Flynn movie.
Oh. Where was I? So Peter is helping lead the search in the tin mine, but turns out that it's a ruse to keep people from finding his own lab. Dun, dun, dun. He has been the mysterious figure all along. Now, his latest victim, Beale, kind of managed to escape. The substance that he was injected with kind of immobilized him and made him look like he was paralyzed, but he shakes off enough of it that he's able to crawl out of the mine, and he's found on like the seaside cliffs. Now, Peter's dad, Dr. Blood Sr., is at the university lab in like the town over analyzing the substance that was in the found syringe. So Peter is brought in to look at George, bring in like a medical kit, and he injects Beale with that same kind of substance again and declares him dead at the scene.
Yeah, he says he's injecting him with like adrenaline because they find him and he's super weak, but he uses that as like a cover to inject him with this paralyzing agent.
Because his dad is out at the other town, Peter does the post-mortem. But actually, he plans to revive George from like the paralytic jug and then take out his still beating heart. Now, he's interrupted by the morgue director, whose name is Morton, which is very fun to me. And this unfortunately leads to Morton being killed in the struggle. His body is hidden in Beale's coffin because Beale dies on the table, and so ultimately, Peter's not able to get the heart. And so there's the coffin for you from the title.
Mm-hmm. Not a very like strong connection.
No. So unfortunately, Peter's experiment is ruined, so he needs a new victim. Throughout all of this, Peter and Linda have been growing closer and are basically dating. Peter learns that Linda is a widow, and she learns that he has great scientific ambitions, and those fools at the Vienna Academy were holding him back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the typical thing. Now, Peter finds his next victim in the miner Tregay, and he does the same kind of thing of chloroform, makes him look like he's dead, and then he is cutting out the still beating heart when he is interrupted by Linda. Now, she had been becoming a little suspicious throughout this whole time because of something I just realized I forgot to mention, even though it's in my notes. Peter's dad, Dr. Blood Sr., identifies the substance in the syringe as curare, which is a substance that basically causes a paralytic effect. She saw that Peter had, like, as a quote-unquote souvenir from a friend, the carrying case of the classic bamboo carrying case of curare. So she's like, well, that's a weird thing. And there's just like other little pieces here and there that have been piling up for her. So she's been a little suspicious for a while. And now that she interrupts this odd experiment, it kind of confirms everything. Their confrontation has the usual, you're dabbling in God's realm. But at least this is now when we get to hear from Peter about what the heck his fucking experiment is. He explains that if he can take the still beating heart from someone who's alive and put it into someone who is dead, that person will become alive again. Which is false.
That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. At least with Frankenstein and the brain, that kind of makes more sense. But a beating heart is just a muscle reacting to stimuli.
Well, also, like, in most of these kind of sci-fi horror bring someone back to life movies, like, there's some made up piece of science that serves as like the sort of missing key here. Like in the Frankenstein movies, for instance, yes, we're putting a bunch of dead body parts together, including like a brain, but then we're like injecting it with a bunch of like lightning, and there's like a whole bit of machinery here.
Yeah.
Right? There's like some sci-fi part of it. This is literally just the idea that like I can dig up like a body that's been dead for like a year or more and stick like a beating heart into it, like do a heart transplant, and that will just bring that body to life irregardless of any decay that has otherwise occurred to it.
Yeah.
There's no extra bit of sci-fi here.
Yeah, and the curare is really just a means of like causing someone to be paralyzed so you can take them. There's nothing relating between that drug and this experiment beyond getting the victim in its place.
Yeah, curare is really interesting in that way because so it's a paralyzer, but it only paralyzes voluntary muscles. So anything in the body that's involuntary, like your heartbeat or your lungs or stuff like that, like isn't paralyzed by curare.
Okay.
Yeah. The way that it kills people is not by stopping the process of breathing, but by the paralyzed muscles around the lungs will like slowly restrict the lungs. Yeah. And like slowly suffocate you that way. Anyways.
Fun facts here at Scream Scene. So Linda's like, no, dude. A, that's none of this works. B, you're killing someone who's alive. That's murder. There's no like scientific basis for any of the things that you are doing. And yeah, you are trying to create life where there is none, therefore dabbling in God's realm.
Yeah, it's definitely like a sort of a problem when your method for bringing someone back to life is you have to kill another person to do it. But
Peter's like, I'll kill the right people, the people who aren't deserving of life, and give life back to the people who are more deserving.
Yeah. Peter's,
the classic eugenics.
Yeah, Peter's got some, his whole like, yeah, I'll kill a tramp to bring back a Nobel Prize winner kind of ethos combined with his like, they were just trying to like hold back my ambitions, makes me think that like Peter's definitely like a reader of like the literature of Ayn Rand.
Yeah, 1961. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. See that for him. Peter takes this rejection of his experiment from Linda as also a romantic rejection of him and claims that she's still in love with her dead husband. So as she runs off to go tell the police that like, hey, Peter's doing all this in the morgue, Peter takes Tregay's heart and goes and digs up Linda's dead husband and puts the heart in her dead husband, whose name is Steve. Classic Steve. I don't know why. It's probably because of...
For me, it's Flight of the Conchords.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Like from Hippopotamus.
Okay.
Like, did Steve tell you that? Steve. That's where my brain goes.
Okay. So Linda is later forced into the mine by Peter to have this confrontation with Steve. And Peter says, look, I succeeded and you rejected me for this? And it's like this decaying guy. He's been dead for like 3 years. It's been established. And they do a really cool job with the makeup. It kind of looks like both in terms of decay, but also just like in general, like an Irish bog body.
Yeah, he looks like he's got moss growing on him.
Yeah, it was a neat design.
Yeah.
And she's like, dude, this is inherently evil. Again, because like only God can give life. And so this is clearly not in God's domain, therefore it is inherently evil. And almost to like prove her point, upon first seeing her, zombie Steve just immediately starts to try to strangle her without provocation. Peter tries to stop it. They end up having a kerfuffle and fighting. Linda escapes, and in the confrontation, Peter is strangled and dies. Then zombie Steve also dies, presumably from the effort of that whole struggle. And Linda makes it out of the mines and meets the police search party outside. So that's the end. So all in all, like, the story beats. We've seen this 1,000 times.
Yeah, totally.
But I do think that this movie does a really good job of finding ways to build tension, finding ways to remix it a little bit, and have an interesting way of telling this well-worn story.
Yeah. When I talk about like admiring the movie, I think a big part of that is knowing the background of like, this is Furie's third movie. It's his first since like coming to a new country. It was not made on a very big budget at all. And it is this very well-worn story. And we've seen so many hack movies.
Yeah.
That, you know, I really appreciated the location shooting. Like, we're on location in Cornwall for all of the exteriors, right? And that's like really cool. And it's like, yeah, this is what like an English village actually looks like, instead of, you know, the fucking places we go in American movies on sets when they go to English villages. And like, you see the coast and the sea. The color photography really
adds a lot.
It really does. And you know, I was talking to Sarah while we were watching the movie about this, but like, after 314 episodes of doing this show, my brain has become weirdly programmed when we watch these, that like, I think of color as like high-end, high-budget stuff. When we watch it, it's like, oh, this one's in color. Like, this one must actually be like a real movie or something. And, you know, I talked in the intro about how Eastman color was starting to become available to low budget productions because it didn't require the same kind of lighting and camera expenses that Technicolor did. But I'm still not used to seeing these like lower budget films with color, and it really like makes the picture feel bigger than it is. I also have to admit that I really enjoyed the 1961 like fashions and cars on display here. Like, we're getting into an era of fashion and aesthetic in Western cultures that like I really like. I really like mid-century modern kind of look. I think the script is really intelligently written with a lot of well-observed details. Like, even if it's the same old, the writer clearly did research about curare. The writer did research about autopsies and biochemistry and
the process that a police sergeant would go through when investigating something.
Yeah, these characters feel like they exist in a semi-real and well-researched world. I think the cast acquits themselves pretty well. Like, there isn't really any bad performances here. And I think Furie directs the movie well. There's a lot of interesting shots and like Dutch angles and like camera movement. Like, it's not just the same shots over and over again.
Yeah, I thought keeping Peter's identity a secret was a really neat approach, especially because like I saw it coming from a mile away because we have seen this story many, many times. Mm-hmm. But you didn't pick up on some of the things I was picking up on. And so when it was revealed, it had a bit more of an impact for you. And I thought it was like a neat approach. There were, particularly because in the kidnapping scene that we get to see, we don't see Peter's identity because of the way that the camera's being framed in these very enclosed close-ups. Mm-hmm. And it was such a unique style approach to things that I was like thinking, is this showing Furie's experience in filming for TV? Because in TV, having a lot of close-ups works really well, whereas you don't necessarily need to be that close to someone's face when you are planning to show this on a big theater screen. And I don't mean that as like you film this for TV as a derogatory statement. I really just mean like, you know, it's very cool to see a lot of these close-ups, to see so much moving camera, to see so many multiple angles in the same scene.
Yeah.
Like, you are spending time on filming this. You're not just trying to quickly move on to the next thing. And I think that's really showing that Furie has a lot of ambition. Yes. And he's really taking his shot here.
I think that one of the reasons why I didn't suspect that twist the way that you did is the movie's called Dr. Blood's Coffin, and we start with this surgeon being like, oh, you don't understand like my genius experiment, like how dare you hold me back. like you assume that like, okay, we're going to have a mad scientist. He's the bad guy. The bad guy's going to be named Dr. Blood. And then, you know, we see this mystery guy taking these captives. And yeah, I had this moment of like, why are they keeping his face covered when like the only reason you do that is to reveal that it's some character, but we hadn't been really introduced to a lot of characters at that point. That made me realize that like the guy at the start of the movie had the surgical mask on, so we hadn't really seen his face either. And that got my head thinking along the lines of like, well, if he's not a character we already know because like we don't know anyone, then why are they holding his face? Why are they hiding his face? And I thought like, oh, maybe it's going to be like he's disfigured in some way, and that's why he's doing these experiments to like cure some sort of disfigurement.
That's true, because we don't even know what his experiment involves at that point.
Right. And so then I think the reason why I didn't suspect the lead character is like when he shows up and he's like, hey, I'm Peter Blood. And we are like, oh, you're the Dr. Blood of the title. And then I was like, oh, is the Dr. Blood of the title the hero of the movie? Because when Peter Blood shows up, like Kieron Moore, who plays him, is super handsome. And, you know, he's got like dark hair and a square jaw, and he dresses in great suits. And like, this is really the movie's big differentiator from other mad scientist movies, is that like, other than the mad scientist, our lead character is a typical 1961 romantic lead. Like, he's super attractive. He has this romance subplot with Linda. Like, he could be James Bond. Yeah. From the way that the movie depicts him. He's super, you know, attractive and heroic and all these kinds of things. And he's like helping out the cops. And like, you picked up straight away that when he's like, oh yeah, I'll help you find the weird mad scientist in the tin mines, because like I've known those tin mines since I was a boy, that like you immediately picked up like, yeah, so you're going to lead them away from your evil lair. And
well, because like he comes in and they're like, yeah, we're just examining this piece of evidence. And he immediately fucking touches it. And the surgeon's like, but fingerprints. And he's like, oh, sorry, I didn't think of that.
Yeah. And I had instead like locked into like the fact that the movie was presenting him as like an attractive, heroic character, that like I just sort of accepted like, okay, cool, he's that type, right?
Sure.
Because he's not being like, because even though in Hammer's Curse of Frankenstein, Peter Cushing as Frankenstein is the lead character in the same way that Peter Blood is here.
But he's not the romantic lead.
Well, and he's you know, even though he has romantic relationships in that movie, including with a character played by Hazel Court, right? Peter Cushing isn't framed as hunky in that movie like Peter Blood is. And you know, that threw me off. And that's really the thing that impresses me in terms of the story of this movie. Because like, yeah, otherwise this is the same old, like, they laughed at me and science doesn't need ethics and nothing should be impeding progress kind of stuff that just feels like very hack by this time.
Yeah.
But with Peter Blood, there's all these things like the whole thing where he's doctoring evidence because he's been recruited by the police to catch himself feels very ahead of its time. Like, that's a very like modern forensic Criminal Minds, Dexter, Hannibal kind of thing, right? And I think if anything, they could have done more with that.
I would agree. I think like, yeah, the shift to Peter as a romantic lead is really interesting. Like, he has a line before he's really revealed much about his like scientific ambitions to Linda, that like, I had plans, but I didn't count on you. Like a very romantic, hokey line, but it works. And I really liked how narcissistic our baddie is. And I really liked the turn of him being like, you're rejecting me? When it's like, no, your idea, not you, your idea. But, and he's like, fine, I didn't like you anyway. It felt a very realistic and an intriguing layer to the tried and true mad scientist.
And the movie really enjoys playing with our sympathies, because even after it outright reveals to the audience that like Peter's the bad guy, it keeps going with this like romantic subplot with Linda. And like they're played legitimately, right? He's not played as like creepy. Mm-hmm. He's still played as like hunky. And a lot of the scenes, the dramatic tension in the scene is like, oh, is he going to get there in time to cover up his evidence, right? And it's almost like positioning us on his side even after we know what he's up to. And I think a big part of that is we don't know what his motivation is for a long time, even once we know that he's the mad scientist. And so there's this thing where it's like, okay, well, we know he's doing like shady shit, but like maybe it's for a good reason, and it keeps us kind of guessing. And I think it's very interesting for like a movie from 1961 to let the hunky lead be the bad guy and not position like an alternative hunky lead to show up and be the hero. Like the heroes are, you know, Linda, and then like Peter Blood's dad, who's an old man, and like the sergeant of like the police here, who's like a middle-aged dude, like middle-aged short balding dude who sweats all the time.
Yeah. Like
nobody here is like the hero except for Peter Blood, who's actually the villain, which is really interesting.
And I really liked that the movie also plays with the fact that we know he's not a good guy. Mm-hmm. So after George Beale is dead, and it's clear that Peter needs a new person to take the heart from, the movie starts to play his relationship with Linda as like more menacing, and he's like showing a bit more of himself. Like he takes Linda to the mines, and in the back of your mind, you're like, is she the next victim? But I thought you loved her. And he starts talking about how, like, yeah, I used to play in these mines as a kid and dream that I was like a pharaoh brought back to life, or like controlling the dead or something like that. And she gets like visibly creeped out to the point where I was like, why are you still going on future dates with him? And then that's when Tregay, the miner, shows himself, and then he's the next victim. So just like interesting ways of showing, of playing the tension of like, is she in danger? I don't know yet. But also showing from her perspective of like, why is this very charismatic guy suddenly a little weird?
Right.
Like just a little like off.
I think that even though what Steven's doing is kind of weak as a sci-fi premise, like the heart transplant thing doesn't make sense, and we've seen like this is just some Frankenstein shit again, I did like that the movie brings up some metaphysical questions about this. Like, yes, Linda's like, oh, you know, you can't create life, like that's God's domain, and this is all like very stock dialogue we've heard a million times. There's an interesting point where, you know, Peter tries to justify what he's doing by being like, well, but I could bring back like Nobel Prize winning people and like great artists and like whatever, and they could continue to contribute to mankind or whatever. And a lot of these movies, you know, have this very like boilerplate, what about God dialogue, but very few of them go into much more depth than that. And here, this movie gives Linda some really interesting stuff about like, even if scientifically you can restore life to the body, like that's not going to like summon their souls back from like heaven to like inhabit those bodies.
Yeah.
So they aren't going to be like, oh, here I am, Albert Einstein, like back to improve the world or whatever. It's just going to be like an empty shell, and whatever is inside it is going to be something, you know, demonic from hell. It won't be that person. And that's like really interesting. And it's like we've never really considered that part of it in any of these stories before, you know, of like, yeah, like where, like why would, even if scientifically you can like jolt the body full of electricity and new blood or whatever and get it moving again, like if the soul is real and if God is real and if we're taking that religious side of it, well then yeah, when a person dies, their soul leaves their body. So like, unless you're also performing some like, you know, eldritch rituals here, you know, you're not summoning the soul back. And that was really interesting. And it sort of bears out in when Steve returns and is just kind of like, you know, murder. Except that when Steve first like opens his eyes after Peter brings him back, he does moan like Linda. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So like, where's, you know, what's the movie's opinion on this and what's really going on here? And that was all very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you think about it with Frankenstein, the creature is a whole new being.
Right. He's not like a resurrected version of someone else. He's a totally new person.
Yeah. That's something I hadn't really thought about in terms of comparing Frankenstein and zombie things, actually. So that's cool. I agree with you about like this movie's very well made. I really like the on location filming, the sets. There were some very cool matte paintings used in windows. I think there was a lot of effort put behind this movie, and so I also really respect it. I'm ready to rank, but is there anything else that you would like to say?
Yeah, unfortunately, there are some bad things with this movie.
Yeah, go ahead.
So despite all of this that we've been saying positively about it, I do think it's sort of reach exceeds its grasp in terms of these ambitions. And this is kind of like the low budget problem where it's really doing a lot of cool stuff to make it look better than its budget. But ultimately where it fails is like not a lot of events can happen. Like there aren't a lot of deaths here. And
I mean, there's a lot of disappearances. George Beale dies, Morton dies, Tregay dies. Like, I think there's like a sizable amount.
That's fair.
And in each case, we do feel sympathy for the person who's dying. So I would say that it kind of hits a little harder. But I will say that it got a little repetitive.
Well, and the story doesn't really get to like escalate.
Yes.
It is just like, oh, he captures Beale and then Beale dies. So he has to capture someone else. So then he has to capture someone else. Like nothing escalates past like, I need to get a body to put a heart in a dead body. He just keeps getting stymied in his attempts to do so until the last 5 minutes of the movie. Because that's the other thing is Steve is not brought back and wandering around like a monster until like the very end.
And he doesn't really wander. He's just in the one cave.
Right. So like Steve's just in kind of the last few minutes. And in my opinion, what this ends up doing is because we're with Peter for our POV character in a lot of ways, despite the opening fake out. Once we know that he's the guy, the focus here isn't really on horror. Like, there's a lot of horror tropes and sci-fi tropes being sort of parroted in the dialogue about, oh, they laughed at me and so on. But structurally speaking, this is being played more like a mystery thriller. There isn't really a mystery because the audience is in on it. But, our tensions are around things like, oh, is he going to get away with it? Like, oh, is he going to get to hide that evidence? Are they going to find him out? The scenes where he's like doing a lot of like the murders and stuff, I don't think are really being played for frights. We talked in the intro about like critics criticizing this movie for being like super gory. And we were like, ooh, what's that going to be like? And what it really boils down to is that we see like a beating heart in like the chest of George Beale that's been opened up. And then when he's doing the transplant, like the beating heart's in his hand. It's not the best fake heart I've ever seen in a movie.
Not the worst.
And, there's some violence here. And like we said, the corpse of Steve is like a neat makeup effect. But really, I think the horror stuff really only kicks in the last like few minutes of the movie. And so I think if it ranks on the list, it's going to lose points for that. I think it needed more gore, more violence. I think we needed to be much more from Linda's point of view. If we wanted this to be like horror of like, oh, this guy you're attracted to, turns out he's creepy and weird and bad, right? But because we're mostly with Peter, like even once we know he's bad, it's more of a thriller structure. I don't know if this movie's really trying to like frighten its audiences that much, at least before the ending.
I hear what you're saying, especially thinking about the modern comparisons you made of like Criminal Minds or Hannibal or whatever. I think if you took someone from 1960 and were like, what's a thriller? They'd be like, film noir. And this has nothing to do with film noir. And so that's my means of saying like, this is maybe a branching point for some of the thrillers like Silence of the Lambs that we see coming in the far future, like 30 years. But I think that this was made to be horror.
Okay. I mean, I'm willing to agree with that. I just feel that like you going into this with like, oh, it's a zombie movie. Like it's not really. And even for like a mad scientist movie, it's got that like 1940s Frankenstein problem where like the monster comes into the movie in the last like 3 minutes to tear up the laboratory and then be destroyed again kind of thing.
Yeah, I would point to the fact that we have a lot of sympathy for each victim. Like even Morton, like Morton, the poor old man, and then he gets killed. Like it doesn't strike me as like a thriller death, if you know what I mean.
I get what you mean. Like, yeah. It's just that like so much of the movie is being taken up with this like idea of like, oh, we're investigating this mystery that the audience already knows the answer to because the investigator is the murderer. Like, I think if you're going into this, even as a 1961 horror fan, you're not going to be really getting what you were expecting or what you're wanting out of this.
Yeah, that's fair.
You're just going to be getting like two really hot people like going on dates on the Cornish coast.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
I mean, there isn't like that,
So I feel like we should rank this.
Okay.
And I have a range. How do you feel?
Yeah, if you want to rank this, I've got a range picked out.
Okay.
So, like I said, I'm looking a little low because I think this movie doesn't manage to succeed as a horror movie that well, but not so low because I think the competence in the filmmaking, buoys it a bit. I'm looking below the halfway point though.
What's the halfway point?
I think these days the halfway point's probably like 170 something, maybe. Okay, we're almost at 300, so it's like 150 something.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Then I'm in agreement with you. I'm also looking below the halfway point.
Okay. So, I needed to try and like find a range that worked for me here with balancing those aspects of the movie, that it's well made versus it's not really good at being a horror movie. And the range I picked out was 205 to 220. So 205, that sort of came from like looking around that area. I think movies like Dracula in Istanbul, The Bat, Genuina, Cry of the Werewolf, these are like much more definitively horror movies in my mind. The original Mummy, etc.
Which bat is this?
That's the silent bat.
The silent?
Yeah.
Isn't there
The Bat Whispers is the one in sound. It's a couple spots below that. The Magician, which is at 205 right now, is the Paul Wegener proto Frankenstein movie, which goes on some like tangents to like gambling in Morocco or whatever and things like that. The Bat Whispers at 206 is a little bit less horror and a little more mystery. Movies like The Brute Man are kind of got that like film noir aspect to them. So that's kind of where I was looking around here. And then I was looking for like, okay, but quality wise, where does this movie start to really like beat stuff? And I found like The Unknown at 220, which is a Todd Browning film, very well shot, very well acted, very good tension in that movie. And right below that is, hey, like Monster on the Campus, The Aztec Mummy, The She Creature, stuff where it's like, okay, we're into like schlock territory. And I think that Dr. Blood's Coffin manages to stay above the schlock category, but, you know, The Unknown is as low as it is because it's like not horror for decent stretches of it, and it's kind of a weird type of horror and you know, that kind of thing. So 205 to 220 was kind of the range I was looking in here.
Well, I am looking above you, but not too far. I was having a hard time going down the list, and eventually my eyes kind of settled on things like Alligator People and Return of the Fly. These are monster movies. They are definitely still horror. And they also have the monster through more of the movie than Dr. Blood's Coffin. And it also just felt like those movies were saying something while Dr. Blood's Coffin was playing in with tropes in a new way, but it wasn't trying to say something larger.
Yeah, it's not saying anything we haven't heard said before.
Exactly. So I kind of was like, let's position, let's say, Alligator People as my ceiling, as just a good waypoint. As I looked down from there, my eyes came to The Devil Doll at 197, which is also kind of a movie that, like, very well made. They made like those giant, I was going to say giant miniatures, but you know what I mean, like the giant props.
Yeah.
And the movie just kind of like meanders and has a very weird ending.
The Devil Doll is extremely fucking bizarre.
Yeah, like 3 different movies put into one.
It's super weird that The Devil Doll is a spot above The Mummy.
We know what we did. I think Dr. Blood's Coffin is better than The Devil Doll, while also still suffering from some of the same challenges. So my floor is The Devil Doll at 197. That's like a range of like 20 movies. So I did try to shorten it. And at 182 is Ghost of Frankenstein, one of the worst of the Frankensteins.
Yeah, it's not like Ghost of Frankenstein isn't like outright bad. Because the Universal Frankensteins, you know, are very consistent in a way. But it is probably like the most unnecessary one. Like it's the most boring one. Like you could kind of go straight from Son of Frankenstein to Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman without really missing much.
Yeah. So I do feel like Dr. Blood's Coffin should go at least above the Ghost of Frankenstein. But there, above this, there are things like Soul of a Monster. Captive Wild Woman is here. If I'm remembering correctly, that's the one where she's like swimming in a lake at one point. And
no, Captive Wild Woman's the first one where it's half stock footage from a circus movie and half John Carradine being menacing.
Oh, well.
I don't want to put this above Curse of the Cat People, really.
Like, I hear you. Yeah.
And I'd rather like watch Mystery of the Wax Museum than this.
So what if we just put this straight above The Devil Doll?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. We can do that.
Okay, cool.
So entering the list at the new number 197 is Dr. Blood's Coffin from 1961, directed by Sidney J Furie.
If you would like to see this list, you can go to our website, screamscenepodcast.com. There you can find links to the many episodes that we have mentioned today, as well as our appeals box. If you would like to contest this or any other ranking, including Devil Doll, you can send us an appeal through our Ask box or through email at screamscenepodcast@gmail.com.
Scream Scene updates every other week on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, SoundCloud, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts are available. If you want to make sure you always get the show, regardless of the changing landscape of apps, you can subscribe to our RSS feed. If you'd like to support the show monetarily, you can do so by heading over to patreon.com/Scream Scene Podcast, where you can become a patron of the night for as little as $1 a month. Patrons at the $5 and $10 level get access to all the bonus content that we've made over the years. It's a lot of really fun stuff. So check that out at patreon.com/screamscenepodcast.
So, Ben, what are we watching next week?
Next week, Sarah, we're going to be watching this movie's B-movie.
Oh, no.
So it's directed by Sidney J Furie again.
Okay. I mean, he did a really good job.
For sure. Produced by the same production company as this on a lower budget and different writer, Orville Hampton. And it's got a reputation as being not good. I'm going to just say that. It is The Snake Woman.
I wonder if it will have anything in common with The Wasp Woman.
No, it's no.
No? Oh, that's too bad. Well, we will see you then, creatures of the night.
Bye.
Bye.